From Phil Svitek comes a weekly digital series that shares his insights, concepts, and findings from years of learning and mentorship. Welcome to Phil Svitek Podcast.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. As you can probably already tell, my name is Phil Svitek, and it is my aim with this series to give you a roadmap in your creative endeavors to help make your life a little bit easier so you don't have to make the same mistakes that I did along the way. I'm excited to bring you today's guest, Rob Greenlee, who is the Vice President of Podcast Relations over at Voxnest. Him and I go a couple years back. In fact, I did his series called New Media Show back in 2014. You can always check out that episode. But anyway, Rob has been in the podcast space since the very beginnings, and the insight he has to offer is fantastic. Not only is his journey incredible, but what I love about the interview is that there's so much takeaway for whether you want to start a podcast or where you're looking to build the podcast. In essence, it's kind of like a state of the union for the podcast industry of 2019. So without further ado, please enjoy my interview with Rob Greenlee.
Rob Greenlee, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Yeah, it's great to join you.
It's been a number of years since we last spoke on your new media show. As kind of a jumping off point, I figured, let me ask you, how's that show been going? And, I'll take it from there.
Yeah, it's been going fantastic. It's something that Todd Cochran and I from the Geek News Central podcast and the Blueberry podcasting platform have been doing for, I don't know, I think I even lost count, maybe like 7 years or something like that. We do every Saturday. It's been a great success. It's actually grown to be a pretty large show. So we get thousands of people listening from the podcasting space. And all we do is we pull up two webcams and our microphones and start talking about the past week in the podcasting space. So, yeah. Excellent.
Well, there's so many questions already right there, but let me just start. How did you get involved in podcasting? Because you were there from a very early point before, to me, it was really an industry.
Right. Well, actually, to be quite frank about it, I started out on the radio side. So I walked into a radio station up in the Seattle market and asked them if they were wanting to do a show about the web and the internet and the technology that was growing back in 1999. That was in the middle of the .com era, and then just started walking into a radio station doing a show. I had a couple of friends with me, and we would come in and just produce a fun radio show, and wound up taking that out of the radio station after about a year and a half or so, and started to produce it in my bedroom of my house. So I bought a whole studio set up and microphones and all the typical stuff that are really common with podcasting today. But back in 2000 or so, it was pretty expensive to pull a home studio together. So I think I spent like $20,000 or something like that pulling it together, and just started producing episodes every week. And versus doing it live in the radio station, I would just pre-produce and burn it to a CD, and I would deliver the show to the radio stations.
Wow.
And so and then simultaneously built the distribution online and making my show available as an MP3 download. So I started doing that in about 2000, and then it just kind of grew from there. I just kept doing it. And eventually I guess kind of just worked through all the issues and got a lot of distribution and got on the satellite radio network for a while. I got on 15 broadcast stations, and just kind of started work in the industry helping other people do that. Is kind of how it evolved. And then so now I'm continuing that after 15 years of working in the podcasting space. I had a podcast that started in 2004, and it continued to worked at small companies like Microsoft and helped them with their podcasting platform. In the early days, there's a lot of people that probably didn't know that Microsoft had a podcasting platform, but they did from about 2007 through 2014. And they killed it. So unfortunately, that's a sad story, but that was the second largest podcast platform at the time through those years, versus Apple. So Apple was really dominant. Now we're kind of in this new era where all these huge companies, Spotify, and now Pandora is coming into the space. So things have changed a lot, but that's kind of how I got involved in this. And just as a content creator, as well as helping other people know how to do this as well. And that's what built a career for myself. I've been working a full-time job in this industry for almost 15 years now.
Okay, very cool. So there's so much there, but let's round up. Let's say 20 years since you've first bought your setup, and you said $20,000. So just kind of a real quick answer. What do you think that $20,000 setup would cost you today?
Oh, I think you could do just about the same thing for maybe a couple $1,000s, probably.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, and that's actually getting some pretty high-end equipment.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of give people a comparison. But so you mentioned various platforms getting into the space, and that was definitely going to be one of my questions, especially, you mentioned Spotify, Pandora. I would even kind of throw in iHeartRadio there now that they've had their podcast awards. What does that mean to you now that so many essentially large companies are getting into the space?
Well, it just means that the industry is kind of maturing and it's growing up. I mean, a lot of these, or many of these companies, I'm not saying Spotify specifically or any of those, but a lot of big media companies have kind of come and gone in the podcasting space over the years. So a lot of them jumped on the bandwagon very early on, and then there was a perception of a lull during the like 2008, 2009 timeframe, and a lot of them got out of it, and now everybody's coming back into it again. And now we're starting to see pretty much every major audio listening platform is now, embracing podcasting now as far as, taking on content and offering it now. And so it's a whole new era. And you're right. I mean, even radio has jumped on board big time with iHeartRadio getting involved in the medium. They've been involved in the medium for many years now, but it's certainly something that they've really gotten serious about. And a lot of the other big radio networks have gotten serious about it too, as well as we all know about what National Public Radio has done with podcasting. It's been a big part of what they've done for many years. But it's exciting to see the industry really grow up, and it's really turning into an industry. I mean, there's a lot more people now that are just kind of working kind of behind the scenes. They're not behind the mic anymore. Which for many years, most of the people that were involved in the podcasting were ones that were doing like we're doing right now, actually had a microphone and they were doing shows and creating content. But now it's expanded. There's ad sales people, there's business development people, there's all sorts of jobs that are being created in this space, and it's getting close to $1 billion ad sales market. So it's exciting.
Absolutely. Well, I definitely want to talk about the ad sales side, but even kind of before then, how do you see the eco space as far as podcasts fit in? And more specifically, like kind of where I'm going with the question is, you look at shows like Dirty John or Homecoming that started off as podcasts and now are on television.
Right.
And I often wonder, is podcasting going to be an IP incubator for some of these larger formats?
Well, I think that's certainly what a certain segment of the industry is striving for, right? I mean, there's new companies forming that are doing that specifically as their business model, is to come up with, take some of those scripts that don't get produced down there in Hollywood and give them a run through first as a podcast and see if they get traction. And then they might get picked up and produced as a TV show or a movie or something like that. And I think that there is a certain amount of content that will flow through that, and it's typically going to be fictional or reality-based kind of stories that will funnel through that. But that's certainly just a fairly small segment of the podcasting space. I mean, there's so much variety of content that's being produced, but certainly those shows are going to garner a lot of attention and a lot of media coverage, especially as a resource to Hollywood.
Yeah. So from the creative perspective, what do you see that's perhaps missing in the podcast space, or not as fully leveraged?
Well, I think it is that fictional side. I mean, if you think about it, if you really back up and you look at the high-level view of where podcasting has spent most of its time as a medium, is more on the reality side. So you have shows that really the only differentiation between shows is how long the stories are. So when we talk about content in the podcasting space, we are primarily talking about a storytelling medium, and that's kind of what this is. And what we've seen is the early days of this medium was more short form storytelling. And as we've kind of matured, we've matured into longer form reality, and now we're evolving into fictional based storytelling. And that's kind of the full spectrum. I mean, once we get to that point, then it's topics and themes and areas that you can go is pretty much unlimited. Once you've kind of explored the whole fictional side, right? You can make up whatever you want to do at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And so then conversely, let me ask you, what is missing from the business side? I know, years ago, we've talked about metrics, and it still seems like the hanging point overall is just visibility into metrics. So how far have, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that the metric side is definitely getting better, and it's maturing. The IAB version 2 podcast guidelines specification was set this past year in 2018. And now what we're seeing is more and more of the hosting platforms, and those are companies that host podcasts and make them available to all these listening platforms, basically adopt a common set of processes that are used in the back end to count downloads and plays, right? So we can have a common set of metrics across all these listening platforms, as well as the delivery platform. So as you look at it from a business perspective, up to this point and up to this past year, there's been companies that have built their business models around metrics, right? Which how large of a number do you have, or how accurate a number that you have, and there's been a lot of kind of people that have built companies based on that as a unique selling point. So now we're hopefully going to take that off the table once we get through all this certification process. So everybody's going to have the same metrics. So we can take that conversation off the table and start really focusing on driving value to the advertiser, and then also thinking and understanding the audience better, and not necessarily from a granular level, but just really understanding how big the audiences really are. From a reality standpoint, looking at how people use listening platforms, what their behavior is of clicking on links or taking phone calls and pausing episodes, and being able to accurately track that in a standardized way. And so I think that this next year is going to be a big year for leveling the playing field on that.
Mm-hmm. When you look at the past few years, it seems to me like the growth of podcasts is very exponential. Would you say, is that accurate? And if so, what are some of the big milestone changes?
I mean, I think that the perception is that it's been growing in perception pretty fast over probably the last 3 years. But the reality is, if you look at the actual Edison numbers or the growth rate of the medium itself, it's actually been pretty steady. I think the last 2 years we're growing at like 4 to 5% audience growth a year. Prior to that, we were like in the 2 to 4% every single year, right? So the big fluctuation has been in media coverage of the medium, right? I mean, how much content is getting attention, and articles being written, and people talking about it on television or on the radio. That kind of attention has varied widely over the 15 years. But the medium itself has been pretty steady. It's been steady in advertising growth. It's been steady in the amount of content that's coming into the space, though I would say the last 2 years we've seen kind of a rapid expansion and growth of the content side of podcasting. So there's more and more shows now over the last 2 years than there's really ever been. I mean, if you look at the overall numbers, I think just in the last 2 years, we basically doubled the size of the catalog in the Apple Podcast platform just in that short time. So it's just growing a lot faster. But the actual audience growth is growing a little bit too slowly. I think there's a lot of people in the medium that would like to see the audience side grow a lot faster.
Do you have any theories on how that might happen, that growth?
Yeah, I think that there are. I mean, you look at some of the new platforms that are coming into podcasting, supporting podcasting, like Spotify, and now Pandora's knocking on the door, and you look at Google. Google has a really an opportunity to grow audience for podcasting because their Android devices don't index very highly towards podcast listening, as opposed to or versus Apple devices, which index very highly. So more people are listening to podcasts on Apple devices than they are on Android devices. And I would say that one of the big reasons for that is a first party solution that people have gravitated towards and used on Apple devices versus Android. It's really kind of a new game for Google to get in and do it right and really offer an app that people will use on their Android devices. So I think that's really where the growth is going to be. And I think as the content quality gets better, I think we'll also see growth, but growth is really driven by word of mouth sharing. So good content drives word of mouth sharing. So hopefully that's what will propel us forward.
Let me ask you this, when we've been talking about these big companies, do you, sometimes part of me wonders if there's like, I don't want to call him the average Joe, but just for lack of a better term, so the average Joe wants to start a podcast, and let's say, he's got time dedicated and he can have good production quality and all that stuff. Does he stand a chance in your eyes against some of the bigger celebrities that are getting into the space and the companies that are pouring, let's say, marketing dollars into it, as opposed to just production value alone?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a struggle, as we saw with social media and with blogging, that the more content that's out there, the harder it is to be found or to be discovered or to grow audiences in large numbers. So I think that there is a little bit of a struggle as the industry matures and gets bigger, and for smaller players to find audiences. And I think that's where a lot of creativity comes into play. I mean, one thing the podcasting space has always had is a lot of testing and trial and experimenting with new ideas and new concepts and new ways of reaching audiences and engaging with audiences. And that's something that will continue. And people just need to be focused on how they can do something different or do something unique to stand out. But the fundamentals still apply. Content marketing is content marketing, whether it's a podcast or written or video. I mean, there are core principles that you need to follow to get attention. And as those platform opportunities, whether it be like audio on new platforms that are coming out, or ones that have huge audiences right now, like we're seeing expansion of live on Facebook and Twitter and all of these really, really big platforms. But there's new platforms popping up too that may be opportunities for podcasters to reach maybe new or younger audiences that are looking for content that you're producing that will be cutting edge and looking for an audience. And so I think that there's ways, and I think we're also seeing younger people get into this medium too, more and more. I just did PodCon up here in Seattle, which is a podcasting conference that really caters toward fictional podcasting, and a lot of young people are pretty excited about podcasting these days. It hasn't always been that way. For many years, the demographics of podcasting trended to be a little older, like in the late 20s to 30s and 40s. Now we're seeing early 20s people get really excited about podcasting and creating, fun and creative content.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me ask you this: what do you think about? Because from my point of view, I think one of the things that does excite me is if you're a new creator, you don't necessarily need that large audience. I think there's ways to, going off of Kevin Kelly's 1,000 True Fan Theory, I'm not sure if you're aware, but to me, that's what excites me, is that you don't have to go after a 2 million person audience. You can have an audience of 1,000 people, 2,000, whatever, and survive.
Right. And that certainly is true. I think success doesn't have to be at the million scale. It can be at much lower levels. And like you say, it's all about your goals. It's all about who you're trying to reach. I mean, if you start getting involved in niche content, you're not going to reach those 10,000 people typically. You're going to reach, a core fan group of, like maybe a few hundred or 300 or 400. And that's okay. It just depends on what your goals are and what you're trying to accomplish with the show. It's all about building passionate communities, not necessarily huge communities, because there's a lot of things that you can do with a passionate community that may not be able to be done with a large community. So I think it depends on what you're trying to do and what your goals are. But yeah, I agree with you, 100%, that you don't have to build an audience that's huge in order to feel like you're successful.
So let me ask this, with your guys' show, the New Media show, which again, I had a chance to guest on years ago at this point, but what's your guys' goals there? Besides, I mean, is it part like educational just for you guys to get together a week and just talk about things? And if there's an added benefit, then great. But yeah, tell me more.
Yeah, I think it is. For us, it's really a way for us to just talk about the issues of the week. I mean, there's no prep that goes into that show. So we come at it like we're two guys that meet at Starbucks and on Saturday mornings and just talk about the medium and the industry. Now, sure, we have guests on sometimes, like we had the program manager for Google on, and we had yourself on too at some point. So we do have guests on that can come on and talk about topics, but we still approach it from the same methodology. We just want our guests and for us to just talk organically about the medium and be really authentic about these conversations. And sometimes we go into areas that are controversial and maybe aren't the best things for us to be talking about if we want to further our own personal careers or something like that, or we do kind of push the envelope on topics because we feel strongly that the medium needs to hear some of these things and needs to have a place where those things can be expressed. And we also get feedback from the listener community because we're live. And so we can get that feedback, that direct feedback from Facebook and Twitter on the show and talk about the corollaries that come out of those discussions. But they're really about kind of like cutting edge areas of the podcast medium and what we see happening in the medium, what's wrong, what's working well, what's not, the different events that are going on, who's leading what's and what's coming.
From an audience perspective, what are the topics they gravitate to most on your show?
I think they tend to be really the nuts and bolts of podcasting, which would be around topics related to metrics and topics about different podcasting events that are happening. And I think anything that's kind of like new, so like a new platform. So like when Google Podcasts started to launch, we had the leader from that on to talk about what was happening, because there is a need for the greater podcast community to be informed about things that are happening, because sometimes there isn't very clear information out there about various platforms and what they're doing and how podcasters need to react to those things. So that's really at its core.
Is there any equipment-wise? Is there any company or piece of tech that you find most useful right now for podcasters?
Well, I think the podcasting space is really excited right now about the Rodecaster. It's this mixer that was just released as a pretty terrific kind of podcasting mixer type device that actually allows you to bring in, like Bluetooth connections from your phone into your mixer. It basically it's going to have multi-track recording capabilities. So there's a lot of people that like to record and get their levels coming in from different sources and be able to balance them. And then also it's great for storytellers too.
So with your current company, Voxnest, can you describe from a top level what the company does and what your role is and why you're excited about it?
Voxnest is a parent company to Spreaker, which has been around for about 11 years now, and Block Talk Radio. And so those were two long-standing kind of podcast live streaming audio platforms that merged about a year and a half ago. So that's where Voxnest was born. And Voxnest is really kind of like a technology software company. I mean, we develop software for the podcasting space, and there's different products that we create from client software to just hosting platforms for podcasting apps, all that stuff. It's a very strong kind of mobile platform. So we're doing a lot of great stuff in the mobile side. Plus, we're getting more involved in monetization too. So we're heavily involved in the whole dynamic ad insertion and programmatic ad buying type of stuff as well.
Mm-hmm.
So trying to push the envelope on that, as well as offering great value to content creators that want to do live programs as well. So we make what's called a software program called Spreaker Studio for Windows, Mac, iOS, and Android that enables you to stream an audio program live and fully produce it on your phone or on your desktop. And then the platform also has listening apps too. So we have a robust set of listening apps on iOS and Android and off of Spreaker.com. But my particular role is as the vice president of podcaster relations, which has evolved from a couple of prior job roles that I had prior to this, which I used to be the head of content and I used to be the head of partnerships. So my role is kind of munged into really being kind of like a spokesperson for the company, and my role is a little bit of an evangelist for the industry itself. So that's kind of what I do, like do shows like this talking about the podcasting space. So
absolutely. Well, from the dynamic ad insertion side,
right.
do you think, because there's a lot of talk about one of the things that appealed most was the voice of the host and
right.
having these ads really be baked into the show.
Right.
Do you think that's still the way to go, but in a dynamic ad insertion form, or is it just kind of throwing in ads like you would see on TV?
Yeah, I think it depends on what you want as a content creator. I think these options are there, and if you want to use dynamic ad insertion, if you happen to have the kind of content that really caters to that, which is typically content that has long-term listenership or viewership, that you can monetize over a period of time. Now, I think where the sweet spot of this is the combination of host reads combined with dynamic ad insertion. Now, granted, there are platforms like ours which are taking advantage of a lot of the advertisements that are being produced for radio that are being repurposed into podcasts. Though a lot of that content, that advertising content, is getting better. It's sounding a lot more native to on-demand podcasting. So we're kind of seeing these worlds merge together. Now, the baked-in host read or live endorsement type advertising will still be strong in the podcasting medium. And a lot of shows will just prefer just to do that and have it baked in, and that's what their advertisers want. And so it's really a spectrum now that we have in the medium, where before, I think it was really mostly just host read baked in advertisements. And that's why that's so large in the podcast medium, because that's kind of where it started. Because if you go back to the early days of the podcasting medium, this was not a commercial medium. When it started, shows that had advertising in them were kind of like, that's not cool.
Yeah.
So it was a medium that started out as kind of, with some attitude. It was like, we're going to stick it to the man. We're going to level the playing field on media. We're going to get our voices out without having to be commercially, tainted, right? That was the early days of this medium. But what we've evolved over the years, because as we all know now, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort, takes resources to produce podcast content that's of high quality, and somehow that needs to get paid for. And people's time and effort and energy and investment needs to be thought about. And so that's why we've kind of evolved into moving more towards a commercial model, and how it's becoming more accepted now to run advertising in your podcast.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. What are some of the best, like, let's say let's say a person wanted to go to a podcast event, what would be the best 1 to 3 for them to go this year to really immerse themselves and get the most bang for their buck, if you will?
Yeah, I think that the number one podcast event is Podcast Movement, which is going to be happening in August down in Orlando. So it's at podcastmovement.com. I would consider it to be the number one podcasting conference and expo actually in the world right now. So it's not a huge conference. It's around 2,000 people or so, but there are 2,000 of the top people in the podcast space that chose to go to the event. So, and then probably the second one would be probably the Rain Summit podcast business event that's going on here in New York. I believe it's next month. Or in March. I can't remember if it's March or February, but if you go to Rain Summit, you just do a Google for Rain Summit and you'll find that. I would say that's probably another one of the key ones. And then one that just happened, PodCon in Seattle just happened, and that was 3,000 to 4,000 people. And it's pretty much a strong fan event. And then the fourth one that I would mention, which is coming up here in March, in early March, down in Orlando as well, is PodFest Multimedia Expo. If you wanted to go see this or check this out, just go to podfestexpo.com. And I would say those are the top four.
Excellent. Well, my final question, what are some resources you can point to for people that do want to get started in podcasting and want to learn more about the industry aside from obviously your show, New Media Show?
I would say I would just go listen to podcasts. Go to Apple or Google or whatever device that you're using, and just immerse yourself in the content to get started. Learn about what's out there. Learn about the medium from your own experience, and get your own kind of basis for what you enjoy in podcasting and what you think is good. And then start listening to some podcasts about podcasting from some of the leaders in the industry, like a Dave Jackson or the School of Podcasting or the New Media Show. Yeah, I also do another show called the Spreaker Live Show, which actually talks all about the podcasting side of things around how to do podcasts and kind of the psychological makeup of a podcaster and what they go through and the tips and tricks to produce a really great podcast. So there's a bunch of resources out there that you can learn, but the big thing is you just as a beginning podcaster, you just need to understand what your goals are and what you want to accomplish. Just know that those goals are going to change as you get going in it. It's not going to be a fixed thing, but you need to start somewhere, and it's just try and get a concept of what you're trying to accomplish and what your goals are, and start coming up with some concepts around what your content might be, and then go out and get a hosting account once you're ready to start producing some episodes. So that's what I would recommend.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. I'll include all your social media handles and the links to your shows, of course, in the show notes. Any final words while you have a captive audience?
Well, I'm excited for podcasting, and I think on a very positive note, it's an up and coming medium that really hasn't reached its full stride yet, and so I think getting excited about it and putting some energy into it, I think it's worth it for anybody from a career perspective or from a business perspective. It's done wonders for my life. And I know so many other people that it's been a very positive experience to get behind a microphone and start meeting people and building a community around your show and making connections with others, and also be of help to your community as well. Be a resource to them. And I think what you'll find is that benefit will come back to you in fivefold. So that's my recommendation, is get excited about podcasting if you like to get behind a mic and see what you can do with it. It's a blank canvas for whatever you want to do. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, and I'm sure we'll be in touch.
Okay.
All right. Bye.
Thank you so much, Phil.
Thank you.
Hopefully that was as informative as it was inspirational. I know it certainly was for me, and it was just great to catch up with Rob, so I can only imagine what you took away. In fact, I encourage you to write your thoughts and questions in the comment section so that way I can know more specifically, right? And maybe that way we can do a follow-up with Rob in the future. Furthermore, one of the biggest things you can do is to rate and comment, and also let your friends and family know about this series. If it helps you, then it might just help them. It's one of the greatest gifts you can do, and it's the easiest and simplest way for free that you can help grow this show. Now, if you have a little bit of extra income and would like to support the show, you can certainly do so over at patreon.com/PhilSvitek. Any contribution is truly appreciated, but only do it if it doesn't financially burden you in any sort of way. Also, if you're brand new to the series and you like what you just heard, well, I encourage you to subscribe, whether over on YouTube, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and any other place that is essentially convenient to you. Links are provided below. To keep up to date with the show, you can follow me at Phil Svitek or my producer, Juliette Vibert, over at Bonjour Juliette. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week with another one of my lessons. Bye.